Julianza, déjate tu marico de tu perra madre, ¿viste? Con la gente de cero no se juega, güey. Para que aprenda la verga, para que aprenda la verga.
The video I just showed you allegedly depicts the death of this man, Hugo Figueroa. Hugo was the nephew of famous Mexican singer Joan Sebastian, and Hugo was a rising name in the music industry in Mexico. About a year ago, when Hugo was traveling in Mexico, he was suddenly approached by 7 armed men in a place called Plaza de Toros, or La Aurora. Now, allegedly, the men that kidnapped Hugo were from the Los Viagras cartel, and it's been suspected that Hugo himself had ties to their rival cartel, the CJNG. There's more video that was released of Hugo's abduction that's simply too disturbing to show on TikTok, where masked men tell him you're not at home anymore, don't mess with the people of the hills, and they keep telling him to shut up and threatening him. Shortly afterwards, Hugo's dead body was found on the side of the road in an area close by. It's unknown exactly what Hugo was killed for, but this is just yet another reason why, if you already don't understand why, you do not mess with the Mexican cartels. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to my podcast, Murder in America, that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Imagine enjoying your holiday when a human head washes up on the beach. This just happened in Florida. On the 12th of November, something transpired like that out of a horror film. At around 8:30 in the morning, holidaymakers got a horrific shock. Police had got a disturbing phone call of reports of something found on a beach, and they flocked to the popular tourist destination of Key Biscayne in Florida. Once they got there, they did discover a human head that had reportedly just washed up on the shore that morning. The authorities obviously had to collect the head and transport it to the medical examiner. Now, they obviously needed to determine A, the identity of the person who did this head belong to, and also B, how the person had passed away. So was this a horrific accident, or was this a awful murder mystery? Now, this could honestly be anything. This could be somebody died from a crocodile attack, or potentially this was a hurricane victim who just washed ashore, or it could be a brutal homicide. Police have stated that they believe that the head is of an adult male, but they're unable to say any more at this time.
I don't know if you ever heard about the island of dolls.
All I've heard about is that it's literally just an island by itself with a bunch of dolls.
But have you heard about the legend behind it?
I've never heard about that.
In the 1950s, there was a man. His name was Julian Santana Barrera. He was a guy who loved peace and quiet. He didn't like being around people like that, so that's why he decided to live there. And then one day, his peace was interrupted by a girl that he heard in the canal drowning. In the panic, he tries to save the girl, but then when he tries to save the girl, he realizes that it's already too late. The girl is already dead. A little bit after, a doll appears in the same exact spot that the girl had drowned in. As respect, he ends up hanging up the doll on a tree. But after that whole thing, that same night, he started hearing voices and screams of a little girl basically being tormented by these evil spirits that he said. So what he decided to do was collect dolls no matter where he got them from, if it was a garbage, no matter how they looked, and he would hang them on trees. He put them around his little hut. He believed that by doing this, it would please the girl's spirit and also keep away evil spirits, and every single doll represents an evil spirit. For the next 50 years, he collected dolls, and I'm not talking about a couple hundred dolls, bro. I'm talking about thousands of dolls. But around, I would say 2001, he ends up getting a heart attack. But where his body was found was the exact same spot that the girl died in.
Have people seen shit?
I'm gonna show you a clip because Ghost Adventures actually visited the island, and
imagine being frozen solid in negative 22-degree weather and surviving to tell the tale. This is the unbelievable story of Jean Hillard, the woman who was literally frozen alive. In December 1980, 19-year-old Jean Hillard was driving home in the freezing Minnesota winter. It was dark, the roads were icy, and the temperature had dropped to a bone-chilling negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Jean's car suddenly skidded off the road and into a ditch. Stranded, she decided to walk to a friend's house nearly 2 miles away, hoping to reach help. Bundled in only a winter coat and cowboy boots, Jean began her journey through the snow. But as she walked, the cold overtook her, and just 15 feet from her friend's house, she collapsed. She lay there unconscious for nearly 6 whole hours. By morning, her friend Wally found her lying in the snow. Jean was so stiff he couldn't bend her to fit into his car. When Jean arrived at the hospital, doctors were in shock. Her skin was frozen solid and her body temperature was too low to register. And her pulse barely there, only 12 beats per minute. They feared she wouldn't survive, but then something extraordinary happened. As her body slowly warmed, Jean began to show signs of life. Doctors were amazed as her pulse strengthened and little by little she regained consciousness. Against all odds, Jean Hillard made a full recovery. She suffered only minor frostbite and just weeks later walked out of the hospital with no permanent damage.
A Utah couple was just arrested for sexually assaulting their daughter for over a year because they felt it was safer than her having sex with strangers. So last Thursday, police were called to a home in Provo, Utah after a 15-year-old girl was pleading for help. When they arrived, the girl said that her stepdad had been sexually abusing her for over a year, ever since she was 14, and that her mom not only knew, but also participated. The names of the people involved have not been released to protect the victim, but the girl's 38-year-old mom and 34-year-old stepdad were immediately arrested. Upon arrest, they both admitted to repeatedly having sex with their daughter because they felt it was safer for her to experience sexual things with them instead of strangers. According to police reports, the girl's parents reportedly found conversations the girl was having on Snapchat with strangers a year ago, and according to them, they say that she was taking promiscuous photos and planning to meet up with strangers for sexual activities. Both the mom and stepdad then admitted to police to approaching the girl after finding these conversations with the idea of having sexual experiences together in hopes of teaching her about sex. They said they thought that it would help keep her safe. After his arrest, the stepdad admitted to raping the girl just the night before, but that's not all he admitted to. He also admitted to buying the girl sex toys with her mom, where they then showed her how to use the toys on herself and on them. He also admitted to showering with their daughter and engaging in these acts with her mom. According to the affidavit, the mom said that one boundary is that he would never fully have sex with the girl, but that wasn't true because 2 months before they were arrested, she admitted that her daughter came to her scared about a broken condom, so she definitely knew what was going on. Both the mom and stepdad have been arrested for forcible sexual abuse, sodomy, and rape and are currently being held at the Utah County Jail without bail. The couple have 4 other children together, and while the 15-year-old girl is not biologically his, he said he married her mom while she was pregnant and raised her as his own since the day she was born. At this point, since it's still early in the investigation, it's not clear if any of the other children were also abused. This story is absolutely insane, and I can't believe that they would ever think that this was okay.
You're really telling me that nobody ever saw something? Not one of these people heard or saw something that they shouldn't have heard or seen? None of these celebrities knew what Diddy was doing? I mean, it's frankly very hard to believe. Everyone's been around that friend who gets a little too drunk and says something that they shouldn't. So you're telling me that P. Diddy never got too drunk, too high, too whatever, maybe even too comfortable around some of his elite friends and never said anything about what he was doing? I mean, for decades, P. Diddy has been a hardcore sexual predator, running a massive sex trafficking operation that has involved many, many minors. And still, nobody ever heard or saw a single thing? I mean, with the amount of parties that P. Diddy was having and the people that he was inviting, these seem like pretty big events that he would have to prepare for all the time. And it seems like one person in his organization would tell somebody something, right? Well, I guess not. We should just trust all of these people because they will always tell us the truth. At least, that's what we're told to do. But I don't buy it. Somebody saw something. And I think that there's a silence in Hollywood because not only are people complicit in this stuff, but there had to have been many, many dozens, if not hundreds of others who saw the signs, who saw the victims leaving P. Diddy's place, who were told things over drunken or stoned conversations, who just sat idly by the side and did nothing. And honestly, it doesn't get more disturbing than that. Just food for thought.
Missing Florida woman was just found locked inside of a shipping container nearly 72 hours after she disappeared. And what she has to say about it is bizarre.
So what happened?
I don't know. I was in one place and I found in another.
So this is 52-year-old Marlene Lopez, and she was last seen at her home on Lucerne Drive in Cocoa, Florida this past Monday. She wasn't officially reported missing until Wednesday though, and that's because one of her coworkers became concerned after Marlene failed to pick up her son. The Cocoa Police Department began to search every location that Marlene was known to frequent, but they came up empty-handed. That is until yesterday when someone heard banging and screaming coming from a shipping container next to a business on 2005 North Cocoa Boulevard. When the person managed to get into the container, they found Marlene. She She was uninjured but dehydrated, which I 100% believe considering Florida is so humid and hot. According to police, Marlene wasn't in a good state of mind when she was found, but she said that she was in one place and found in another. The man who owns the shipping container, his name is Troy, and he says that the container is stocked with lawnmowers. He said that he first saw Marlene walking around the area Monday evening, and as part of his routine, he ended up locking the shipping container on Tuesday. Troy said that he didn't hear anything inside that night or on Wednesday, and he believes that Marlene walked inside of the container on her own and passed out. He reportedly found a lighter and a pipe inside after she was rescued. One thing that he does want to make clear is that he is not to blame for Marlene getting trapped, and he says that he's even considering pressing charges against her. According to the Cocoa police, it appears that Troy just locked the shipping container up for the night, not realizing that anyone was inside of it, but they are still investigating the circumstances surrounding the incident.
This is by far the craziest video of 2024. This is a video that has gone viral in the past couple days in which a father or mother's boyfriend is threatening the son to shoot him, and he does. The video opens up with the father or boyfriend pointing the gun at the son. He can be heard saying, "I'm going to blow his effing brains out right now." The mother then comes over and pulls the father away, screaming, "No, no, stop." The father then walks away and the son then says, "Blow my brains out." The father then comes back into the room screaming, "You want me to?" while pointing the gun at him. The son flinches at this point and turns away and says, "Shoot me, I dare you. I guarantee you go to jail for life." The mother then shuts the door and you hear the father saying, "I'm getting ready to blow his brains out and yours. I'm sick of this," to the mother. The son then gets up and opens the door. He then says, "You're going to blow my mom's brains out?" The father then points the gun back at the son and fires. Everything goes silent as you hear the mom gasp. The camera then faces the floor and you hear the mom repeating, "Did he hit you? Did he hit you?" And at this point, you see blood droplets hitting the floor. Once this happened, the mom screams, "Oh my god, you're going to jail." The son then runs out of the house and shuts the door. The video then ends. Luckily, the bullet only grazed the son's ear and he survived, and the father or mother's boyfriend then went into the backyard and ended his own life. Probably because he thought he killed the son with that shot. I don't know what caused this whole situation, but it had to be brewing for some time for the man to snap like this. You can find the video on Twitter, and it has over 25 million views in just a couple of days.
Yogurt shop murders still to this day remains unsolved, and only because of the complications of the judges and the lack of evidence that they had. The victims' names were Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers. So Jennifer and Sarah, they were sisters. Eliza and Jennifer were co-workers, while Sarah and Amy, they were best friends. And the yogurt shop that they worked at was called the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. A lot of people described it as a very, very friendly and comfortable environment, to the point where whenever it got to closing time, the customers would help the employees clean up the place. And also they were so comfortable to the point where the employees would be able to count money without locking the doors. So on December 6th, 1991, it was supposed to be just a regular, normal day. Sarah and Amy planned to have a sleepover at their house. They were also planning to go to the mall, look around, shop, and eat pizza. But before that, she told Jennifer, the older sister, to drop them off there before you enter your shift. Jennifer enters her shift like normal. Sarah and Amy pull up around 9:30ish. They're there just chilling at a booth, eating pizza. There was two men that were sitting at a booth just whispering with each other. They weren't eating no frozen yogurt. They were just
sitting there.
Only one of them had like a can of soda. That's it. And there was this one lady who noticed the two guys. So she ends up telling Jennifer and Eliza, "You guys feel comfortable? Do you guys want me to say anything to them?" And they're like, "Nah, yeah, we're okay. We're just cleaning up right now. We're about to close either way. So by the time we're closed, it should be gone."
Fuck.
So 11 o'clock comes. That doesn't happen. At 11:03, the register get a no sale ring up, meaning a robbery, because you only press that button whenever you need to get money out of the register. Next to the frozen yogurt shop, there was a party supply store. The owner of that store notices that there's smoke coming out of the shop, calls the fire department. They come, they extinguish the fire. They're looking around the building, and then one of the firefighters tells the other firefighter, "Yo, is that a fucking..."
She was buried alive by her boyfriend because he was jealous. These cases honestly make me want to be single forever. Justine Vandershoot and Daniel Biesema's relationship seemed like a normal high school romance. To the outside world, nothing looked amiss. He was 18 and she was 17, and they spent a lot of time just chilling out together and also chilling with Justine's family. However, Daniel had a dark side and was very jealous and controlling. The pair had a family dinner at Justine's house on Labor Day 2003. They then had plans to meet up with Daniel's friend, 21-year-old Brandon Fernandez. Poor Justine had no idea that the pair had a sickening plan. The following morning, Justine's mum, Lynette, woke up and was kind of a little bit alarmed that Justine hadn't come home that night. She tried to give her daughter a ring to see where she was, and she figured maybe she'd just stayed at a friend's house. Justine didn't answer though, and then her mum was extremely worried when Daniel rang her and asked if she'd seen her. At this point, the family reported her missing. Now, police interviewed Daniel and asked him about his whereabouts that evening, and he said he had been with Justine and then he'd left her to go and get a drink. Brandon was also interviewed and he claimed he'd been with Daniel that night and it was just the two of them alone. A day later, worryingly, Justine's vehicle was found abandoned in a car park just miles from her home. Justine's friends were then questioned by police, and worryingly they found out that the relationship between Justine and Daniel had been quite toxic. They also discovered that Justine had been speaking to another guy earlier that year. She apparently quite liked him and they were speaking a little bit. Now, officers tracked down this guy called Dave and they actually interviewed him too. He said though that they had been in communication on the phone a little bit, but that had actually been cut off earlier on. Could this have been a motive for Daniel to want to kill his girlfriend? Now, it turned out Brandon also had a possible motive for this killing. Justine actually knew something about Brandon that was quite incriminating, that effectively he cheated on his girlfriend. Officers then looked more closely into the account that the boys had given of their evening. They found out that they'd actually lied about it being just the two of them, and there'd actually been more people at the apartment with them that night. These people cooperated with police and did eventually state that the boys had gone off together at some point that night. Now, the whole story then started to fall apart. Brandon admitted that Daniel had thought Justine was cheating, so they'd hacked into her phone. Upon finding out that she was talking to this other guy, they'd hatched a sickening plan. Daniel strangled Justine and loaded her body into Brandon's car. They then drove her to a wooded area and took off her clothes. She was reportedly moving in the grave, and they placed her in it and poured a substance over her to try and make her body decompose quicker. Now, horrifically, she was actually gasping for air at the point that they buried her. A pathologist confirmed she had dirt in her lungs consistent with being buried alive. Brandon got just 15 years for second-degree murder, and Daniel...
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play...
Video named Cameron Allen and Dylan Breister raped and murdered a friend of theirs and recorded the entire thing on video. Their victim was their own friend, a man named Callum Simpson, who just days before had welcomed a new daughter into this world with his wife. Callum had been at a house party that evening, and somewhere down the road, those two people in the TikTok video tied Callum up, violently and sadistically raped and tortured him, and recorded the entire thing on their cell phones. Callum would end up dying after the abuse, and the two friends of his watched and laughed as he died. Now, you'd think that right away these two would be arrested, right? Well, Cameron Allen was arrested, so was Dylan, but Cameron Allen was released almost immediately on some sort of bail agreement, and he was photographed at a protest just a few days later, holding up a sign that called for people to be decapitated. Keep in mind, this was just a few days, about a week, after he had raped and murdered his own friend. Now, thankfully, these two have just been sentenced to prison time for murder, but it still won't bring back Callum Simpson, and now his children will have to grow up without their real father. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Courtney, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms.
These are people who died on live TV, and this one is absolutely gut-turning. Many of the deaths that we witnessed on live TV are the product of 24-hour news channels. Because all live news events are completely unwritten. Covering things like hostage crises, attacks, and high-speed chases are bound to go terribly wrong. And there's no telling when exactly this will happen. That's exactly what led to Fox News having to issue an apology on September 28, 2012. They were covering a high-speed chase in Arizona, and even the police backed off when they realized the danger. In place, they opted to plant undercover surveillance and tailed him from the sky in a helicopter. Jodan Romero already had a warrant out for his arrest when he stole an SUV at gunpoint earlier that morning. He weaved through traffic like a madman and sped down commercial areas and ran red lights. When he drove past a group of undercover officers, he opened fire on them through the driver's window. Some believe Jodan had a death wish himself. And finally, after hours, he appeared to have given up. He parked the SUV with the Fox News camera zooming in on him. At this point, even the on-air reporter expressed concerns. Jodan then took off running and tumbled to the ground. He quickly jumped back to his feet and he was carrying something in his hand. You couldn't tell because of the camera angle, but it was a gun. He then walked towards some shrubbery and immediately unalived himself in the head, as hundreds of thousands of people watched. And obviously I can't show the video, but I'll show you a clip leading up to that exact moment.
Just not sure about this. He's getting things out of the vehicle, clearly. It doesn't appear that there's anyone else with him. Well, you know, you wait for the end of these things and then you worry about how they may end. There's nobody else around him. This makes me a little nervous, I gotta tell you. No, get off it.
In Mexico, right? There was this talk show. It was called Las Lavanderas, or the Laundresses.
I've never seen this or heard about this.
It was a very popular show in like the Mexican community. It was two best friends, both of them named Carla, but one was Carla Luna and the other one was Carla Panini. When it was getting closer to the end of their career, they ended up going on tour where they would do live shows. On their very, very last show, Carla Luna, she comes out. Everybody's like, why is she like coming out on stage? Like, this isn't part of the show. She first of all thanks everybody for the support, and then she says, but sadly, we're gonna be ending the show because of something that Carla did to me. I'm not gonna speak about what she did. I already forgave her. I don't want you guys to hate on her. People were kind of like, what the fuck is going on? What did she do to you? Sometime passed, she ends up going on an interview. She just starts addressing what's going on with her health and the situation with Carla Panini. Carla Luna was dealing with cancer this whole time and says that she was having an affair with her husband.
What?
And there's clips, right? Because keep in mind, the show was 10% scripted and 90% improvised.
Yo, you gonna show me the clips?
Yeah.
Oh, nah.
Lo que pasa es que usted su gato no se la parcha desde hace 2 años. Y trae la opresión vaginal. No, fíjese, voy a pedirle a su gato que me parche.
Nah, yo.
There was another instance where they were playing a skit, right? Where Carla Luna plays a wife looking for help from a fortune teller. Panini's playing the fortune teller, and she's like, fortune teller, I need some help. I think my husband is cheating on me because I think he gave me an STD. Carla Panini says, as a fortune teller, yes, your husband is cheating on you with a blonde lady. And the reason why he's cheating on you is because your sex life is boring. As part of the joke, Carla Luna is like, oh, you're blonde, it has to be you. And then they start fighting, and then the whole like skit ends or whatever, right? Fast forward, the reason why it's becoming so viral now is because of Stephanie So. She made a couple TikToks about it, basically comparing it to Marry My Husband. The reason why is because when Luna passed away, Carla Panini ended up marrying her husband, has kids and shit, and recently responded.
This American couple was just kidnapped by 3 escaped prisoners after their boat was violently hijacked in the Caribbean. And what you're about to see is the graphic footage of one of the suspects being arrested. This is Ralph Hendry and Kathy Brandel, a married couple of 27 years. The couple had been living on their yacht named Simplicity since 2013 after retiring and selling their house in Falls Church, Virginia. Ralph and Kathy were spending the winter sailing the eastern part of the Caribbean when their boat was found abandoned on February 21st near the island of St. Vincent. Another boater stumbled across the boat, and when they started looking around, they found evidence of severe violence and contacted the Coast Guard and the police. When authorities entered the boat, they discovered that it was completely ransacked. Items were strewn all over the deck and cabin, and a substantial amount of blood was found on the boat, leaving behind chilling evidence of a violent struggle. The only thing that authorities did not find were Ralph and Kathy. During the initial investigation, police found that the couple were last seen alive on February 18th by their boating neighbors at a dock at the Grand Anse Beach in Grenada, which is a popular tourist destination. When the neighbors woke up the next day, the couple and their boat were gone. Authorities were then notified that on that same day, which was February 19th, these 3 men escaped from the St. George police station nearby. They're officially identified as 19-year-old Traven Robertson, 25-year-old Abita Stanislaus, and 30-year-old Ron Mitchell. They were initially being held for various charges, which included rape and robbery, and they left behind a violent crime spree before being arrested. According to the Grenadines police force, after the 3 men escaped, they then violently hijacked Kathy and Ralph's boat, kidnapped them, and then presumably killed them based on the evidence found on their yacht. The prisoners are then believed to have thrown the couple's bodies overboard while they sailed to St. Vincent, which is where the boat was ultimately found. As of today, March 7th, Kathy and Ralph's bodies have still not been found, but police do believe that they are likely dead and are currently searching for them by air and sea between the islands of Grenada and St. Vincent. As for the escaped prisoners, all three were captured on February 21st after a large manhunt, and they've all reportedly confessed in some way to killing the couple. They're all currently being held, although at the moment, none of them have been charged with crimes against Kathy or Ralph. And how exactly the men escaped in the first place is still under investigation. Kathy and Ralph were experienced sailors who were part of a boating group called Salty Dog Sailing Association. And sadly, the day their boat was found was Kathy's birthday. She would have turned 71. Although the couple have a low probability of being found according to the police, they're still holding out hope that they're out there alive somewhere.
This little boy vanished while Christmas shopping, and it would take an agonizing 8 years for the truth to be revealed. It was December 2003. Daniel Morecambe was a 13-year-old boy living in Queensland, Australia. He had 2 brothers, including his twin, Bradley. Daniel was a sweet boy who generally kept himself to himself. He loved animals and had loads of pets that he adored. On the 7th of the month, Daniel and his 2 brothers went over to their neighbour's house to help them pick fruit. Now, this is something that they did quite frequently. The neighbours would pay them to do this, and then the boys would go on their way. On the day in question, Daniel then made his way to the bus stop to go to a local shopping mall to go Christmas shopping. Now, he regularly took the bus to the Sunshine Plaza shopping mall, so his parents were quite comfortable with this. However, he never made it onto the bus that day. Later on that day, his parents returned home to find that Daniel hadn't come back. Worried, they drove over to the shopping centre to have a look and see if they could see any sign of him. They couldn't, so they were really concerned by this point and rang police. Officers immediately started looking at CCTV to see if they could retrace his last footsteps. They had no luck, so they started questioning ex-offenders in the area. They looked into a man named Brett Cohen. He was a known offender, and sickeningly, in 1987, he'd AR'd a 7-year-old boy after luring him into a park. Shockingly, he got just 1 year behind bars before just being set free to go and do it again. As predicted, when he was released, he went on to AR another young child and got just over 3 years in prison. He was then released yet again to go and ruin another child's life. Now, he apparently became a reformed Christian at this point, found a woman willing to marry him, and had 2 children with her. I actually really disagree with the fact that ex-offenders are allowed to go on to have children, because that just puts the kids at risk massively. Now, regarding Daniel's disappearance, when Brett was questioned, he stated that he had seen the little boy on the day in question, and he'd driven past him and wound his window down and asked if he wanted a lift. Daniel had apparently declined the offer, and then Brett said he just drove on. I think officers probably knew that there was more to this than he was letting on, but without any evidence, they had to let him go. It wasn't until 2011 that they came up with a plan. They got an undercover police officer to pose as a criminal. He befriended Brett and then introduced him to his so-called friends, who just happened to be other undercover police officers. Eventually, Brett admitted to these guys that he had killed Daniel. Now, they got all of this on hidden cameras. After arresting Brett, he admitted to killing the child. He said he wanted to AR him, and when brave Daniel fought back, he just decided to kill him. Now, Daniel's poor family were finally able to recover his remains and give him a proper send-off. Brett was sentenced to life in prison, which in my opinion he should have had way sooner when he abused those poor little boys initially.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Selfies that were taken right before death, Part 1. In 2014, Oscar Reyes participated in the Selfie Olympics and took a photo of himself hanging from his bathroom door. A few seconds later, he slipped and fell, hitting his head on the toilet and dying from severe blood loss. Andrew Macaulay attempted to be the first man to kayak from Australia to New Zealand. He took this selfie and texted his family that he would be home soon, but drowned just 30 miles away from the finish line. In 2011, 3 teens in Utah took this selfie together on the train tracks. It appears to be a happy, ordinary photo, but the glare on the right side of the screen is from the train that runs into them just a few seconds later.
Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a sketch, then I'm going to show you the person that was arrested, and we're going to see. So this is the police sketch for the man wanted in the Delphi murder case, one of the most high-profile unsolved murders right now. For those who don't know, in 2017, two young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German, were murdered while out for a walk in the woods. And a few days ago, this man, Richard M. Allen, was arrested as a suspect in the murders. And Richard looks so different from that sketch that here's actually a photo of him posing next to it, completely unnoticed. A better comparison would actually be this photo that one of the girls posted to Snapchat, where she was able to get video and audio of the man before they were murdered. Details pertaining to the arrest are still under wraps, but I could definitely see how that man would be this man, more so than the police sketch.
Normal-looking photos that have a disturbing backstory. Part 25. In 2012, a group of 10 travelers from New Zealand boarded a hot air balloon. But during the landing process, the balloon collided with the power line, causing it to erupt into flames, killing all 10 people and the pilot on board. This is the last photo ever taken of Kim Wall, a journalist who was stabbed 15 times by Danish inventor Peter Madsen after she boarded his homemade submarine to interview him. This image shows brothers Nick and Jack Savage taken just a few hours before their death. Their mother found them dead in their sleep after experimenting the previous night with opioids just a few days after their high school graduation. This photo of Bart and Kevin Whitaker was taken a few hours before a hitman that Bart had hired attempted to kill his entire family after they returned home from a graduation dinner. Sadly, his father was the only member of the family who survived. Notice Bart's hand.
This man has been sentenced to 100 years in prison after doing the unthinkable to his daughter. Tony Valles is a 66-year-old from Helena. On the 10th of July 2022, he was at home with his partner Heather. Tony's 8-year-old daughter Ariana and his 18-year-old son were also at the house at the time. Suddenly, two women entered the property who he believed were evicting him. He flew into a violent rage and grabbed a weapon from his bedroom. At this point, he began shooting. He shot Heather and she fell to the floor, and then he shot at his son. His 8-year-old daughter tried to escape and run from the terror, but she was hit with gunfire. She was on the stairs when she was hit by a bullet and she fell back. She tragically died after being rushed to hospital. After his daughter's death, Tony stated, "I'm sorry for all this. I can't undo what I've done. The pain and the misery will last a lifetime, and I'm sorry for all that." Tony was sentenced to serve 100 years in prison.
This is by far the worst love triangle story I've ever heard of. In September of 2020, 31-year-old Armando Barone murdered his wife's co-worker when he found out that she was having an affair with him. 25-year-old Jonathan Emerald and 33-year-old Brittany Barone were together at a biomedical device company in New Hampshire. But on this specific day, Armando went through Brittany's phone and lost it when he discovered text messages between Brittany and Jonathan. He beat Brittany so bad that she passed out, but it doesn't end there, and let me warn you, it gets really disturbing. That night, after Armando threatened to take Brittany's life, he took her phone and texted Jonathan pretending to be her. He then lured Jonathan to a park where he shot him 3 times and then drove 200 miles to a campsite where he forced Brittany to decapitate his body. Armando ordered Brittany to bury Jonathan's head in the dirt and told her that once the sun came up the next morning, he would forgive her. He then left Brittany in the wooded area so that she can get rid of evidence, and 2 days later, officers found Brittany at the campsite, and that's when she confessed that something had happened. Brittany was sentenced to 3.5 to 7 years in prison on 3 counts of falsifying evidence, but she has been released. And Armando was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
My daughter gave birth to my 7 children. My name is Joseph Fritz, and this is my terrible story. I built a secret basement under my house in Austria. There, I locked up my own daughter Elizabeth for 24 long years. I was a manipulative, domineering father. No one could have guessed what was going on in that basement. I led a double life. A normal husband and father on the top floor and a monster in the secret basement. During the years I spent with that basement, I committed atrocities against my own daughter. Elizabeth had 7 children. 4 of them grew up with her in that secret basement, while the other 3 lived upstairs with my wife and me, unaware of the truth. But in 2008, everything changed. One of the girls was born in the basement because Austin became seriously ill. I had to take her to the hospital, but I didn't know that would be the beginning of my downfall. The doctors asked questions. The police and media began to investigate. My terrible secret was revealed. The basement in which I had locked my daughter and children was discovered. In 2009, I was sentenced to life imprisonment. I'm now behind bars where I can't do anything to anyone. My story has shocked the world, and many people wonder how such a crime could go unnoticed for so long.
More information has been released recently about the killing of 4 university students at the University of Idaho, but the killer is still at large. On Sunday morning, 4 students were found stabbed to death in their beds near campus. 2 other roommates were at home at the time upstairs, but both were unharmed. It's believed that their deaths occurred around 3 or 4 in the morning, though the 911 call was not placed until the following day. It's also now believed that they were asleep at the time of the attack. Initially, police believed that there was no further threat to the community, but they have since backtracked that. And as of now, they're looking for a K-Bar brand combat blade that they think was used in the attack. A live stream from a food truck actually shows Madison and Kaylee ordering food hours before the attack happened. In the video, this man can actually be seen behind the girls, walking around and looking at them, leading many internet sleuths to believe that he was somehow involved, but he has since been cleared by the police. Police have also released this updated timeline of events showing that Xana and Ethan were at a party and Maddie and Kaylee were getting food that night. A lot of this information has actually been uncovered by Kaylee's sister, who's taken a lot of the investigation into her own hands. And one thing that she wants people to know is that Kaylee called her ex-boyfriend 6 times that night, an hour before the attack happened. Right now, we don't know if that means anything, but it is something that she wanted out there. Classes have not been canceled on campus, but if you choose to not go, you will not be penalized. And if anyone has any tips or information on this case, you can call a tip line at 208-883-7180.
This is the tree video, one of the worst ISIS execution videos you should never go looking for, explained. The video that I'm about to explain is extremely brutal and I don't recommend looking it up. The victim in the video is apparently a US spy and he is wearing an orange jumpsuit like most victims are in ISIS videos. The video is about 40 seconds long and it begins with the victim standing up, but his arms have been chained to 2 trees which forces him to stand up with his arms stretched out. One of the ISIS members then reads a statement accusing the victim of being a spy. 2 young boys who look like teenagers can be seen standing behind the victim. The boys have their arms raised above their heads like they are about to swing something, and upon looking closer, you can see the 2 boys are about to swing swords. The video then shows the 2 boys swinging the swords at the same time, and they cut off the victim's outstretched arms. They managed to cut them off in one swing, but this could be due to editing because ISIS loves doing that. You then get a close-up shot of one of the older ISIS members slitting the victim's throat. The camera sits in a still shot and zooms into the victim's eyes as he is being beheaded. The video then jump cuts and it shows the victim's headless and armless corpse. It also shows the victim's severed arms hanging from the trees by the chains. The video then concludes as an even younger child who is no older than 9 reads out a statement with his foot on the victim's severed head, and this is where the video concludes. ISIS execution videos are extremely hard to watch and I don't recommend ever looking for them, or this one. Please do yourself a favor and stay curious because this video is extremely brutal.
This former Disney music executive was charged with child sex abuse. This is John Healy himself, who's now in his 60s, and in 2017 he was charged with 3 felony counts of child sex abuse. All of this had happened apparently a decade ago. He was accused of abusing one girl when she was 15 years old and then targeting another 11-year-old girl and abusing her all the way up until she was 15. When he was arrested back in 2017, John's Twitter profile only read one thing: Disney concerts and living to glorify God in all things. Now, when all this happened back in 2017, I read that Disney terminated him immediately from his position. I mean, how could they not? These were some very graphic and disturbing allegations that were made against John. But if you go to his LinkedIn page and you scroll down a bit, it says that he still works at Disney. I don't know what that means, if it's true or not, but it's kind of strange. In fact, I can't even find anything about how this case was ended. Hold up, now this is interesting. So I just stopped and really dug into the research about this guy, and I found that they dropped the charges in 2019 because there was a hung jury. They couldn't reach a decision on whether or not he was actually guilty of these crimes or not. Apparently, according to this news article that I'm reading, the people involved in the case did not want the charges to be dropped, but his defense team argued that since it was the 3rd trial that he was involved in, the case should be thrown out, and the judge complied and just threw all the charges out. So, I don't know, maybe he is still working for Disney. Maybe it does make sense. I don't really know. But it should be noted that allegedly the girls that he abused were from his own family. They were family members of his, and obviously they were minors. I guess we'll just never know the truth on this story.
Did this child help to solve her own murder? Nicole Koppler was 14 years old from Lima in Ohio. On the 19th of May 1999, she vanished. Her family was understandably very concerned, and this was only amplified when they made a sickening discovery. Up until her disappearance, it was revealed that she'd been spending time with a man called Glenn Fryer who had a criminal record. Disturbingly, this was for SAing a young girl. It would be an agonizing wait for Nicole's family before there were any developments in this case. And horrifically, it would take a 12-year-old girl to be attacked before any light was shone. In 2002, Glenn was charged with R-ing the girl in question. And police ended up searching his house and made a worrying discovery. They found Nicole's ID and her diary. The diary had a very unsettling entry in it, dated May the 24th, 1999. This was just 5 days after she vanished. She'd written in the diary entry that she had run away from home intentionally but did want to go back. She wrote in her diary that the people that she was staying with would not let her leave. Unsurprisingly, Glenn became the prime suspect in her disappearance. Police were actually working on a theory that maybe Glenn had taken her with the intent of human trafficking, and then potentially she could have resisted and he may have killed her by accident. He also may have killed her intentionally if she had resisted, as it was just too risky. Now, tragically, Glenn was never convicted of anything in relation to Nicole's case because just days after pleading no contest for the 2002 R, he took his own life in his police cell. It then wasn't until 2012 that Nicole's family could finally have some sort of closure in this case. Glenn's house taxes went unpaid and the house was abandoned for years. The council decided that it was unsightly and they needed to demolish the house, and as they did so, a discovery was made. The demolition team found human bones that were found to be Nicole's. Her family was finally able to put her to rest. This is the horrific case of Lee Rigby that stunned the UK. It was initially just a normal afternoon on the 22nd of May 2013. British Army soldier Lee Rigby was off duty in London. He was walking down Wellington Street when a horrific tragedy would occur. At this point, Lee was just 25 years old. He was a well-respected drummer and machine gunner from Manchester and was engaged with a 2-year-old son. He was an avid supporter of the charity Help for Heroes. On the day in question, 2 men, Michael Adebelejo and Michael Adebowole, were in the area. Just before 2:20 p.m, they saw Lee crossing the road. The 2 men launched a brutal attack. They drove a Vauxhall Tigra at him, which knocked him over to the floor. They then exited the car and launched into an attack with knives and a cleaver. A member of the bus noticed an incident and jumped off, expecting to just give first aid. The person thought that it was just a road traffic collision. She got a horrific shock when she realised that Lee was actually deceased. While Lee was on the ground, she started engaging the attacker in a conversation and asking what on earth has happened. He started claiming responsibility for the attack and claimed that it was due to Lee being responsible for deaths of certain religious groups. A phone captured a video of one of the men stating his extremist propaganda to justify the attack. The attackers stayed at the scene while police were called. Both armed and unarmed police were deployed to the area, and as they arrived, the men charged at them. Armed police fired 8 times, wounding the men, and one of the men had his thumb shot off. Afterwards, it was revealed that both men were known to British security services. The day after the murder, 8 people were arrested in connection and 6 were freed on bail and 2 released without charge. Both killers were found guilty of murder, the eldest getting a whole life term without parole and the youngest receiving just 45 years. The Lee Rigby Foundation was set up to support bereaved military families. Recently, Lee's son received a Pride of Britain award for his fundraising work for Scotty's Little Soldiers in memory of his dad.
This is Roman Polanski, a known Hollywood pedophile, ex-husband of Sharon Tate's, and a very famous film director. I'm going to warn you, this story has some very graphic details, so viewer discretion is advised. So if you don't know Roman Polanski's movies, he directed films like Rosemary's Baby, The Pianist, Chinatown, Oliver Twist. He has so many movies under his belt. But something that I didn't know about Roman Polanski is that his family lived in Poland during the Holocaust. His pregnant mother was murdered in a concentration camp, and he actually escaped by just running. Apparently, Roman had to roam the countryside for a long time searching for safety, and German soldiers would even play games with him, like making him dance around while they fired bullets at his feet. Roman Polanski began his film career directing movies in Poland before he moved to America. And it was in the year 1967 when he was making a movie about vampires when he met his future wife, Sharon Tate. They quickly fell in love and married. Roman Polanski got Sharon Tate pregnant, and she eventually would become the star of one of his biggest movies of all time, Rosemary's Baby. And if you know anything about true crime, then you probably know the end to this story. Sharon Tate was actually one of the victims of the Manson family, headed by Charles Manson. Roman was in London at the time when Sharon Tate was brutally murdered by members of the Manson family. She was pregnant with Roman Polanski's child. Obviously just a tragic story all around. But that still does not excuse what was to come. So obviously after Sharon Tate was murdered, he went through a very dark time in his life. But eventually he returned to the world of cinema with the film Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson. And on March 11th, 1977, just 3 years after he had finished filming Chinatown, Roman Polanski was at Jack Nicholson's house. And it was at Jack Nicholson's house where Roman Polanski gave a minor, a 13-year-old girl, drugs, alcohol, and then proceeded to assault her. This is his actual mugshot after his arrest. Now, Roman Polanski was arrested almost immediately, and he actually ended up agreeing to a plea bargain where he would have 5 of the 6 charges completely dismissed. But upon hearing that the judge was not going to go with the plea bargain and they were going to sentence Roman to 50 years in prison, he fled the country. That's right, the day before his sentencing, Roman Polanski got on a flight to London and he hasn't been able to step foot back in the United States ever since. In 2009, however, when Roman was in Switzerland, he was arrested at the request of United States authorities. They held him for a few months. Hollywood, for some reason, rallied around him and said he should be a free man. And then he was cut loose. Switzerland denied the extradition request. Now, even past all of this, keep in mind Roman Polanski has never actually served his time for this charge in America. Other people have come forward and claimed allegedly that Roman Polanski assaulted them when they were minors. There was a German actress who claimed that Polanski assaulted her when she was 15 in 1972, an American artist who claimed she was assaulted by Polanski in 1975 when she was only 10 years old. And there's just so much darkness that really surrounds this guy's character and the allegations around him. And if you want to hear something really disturbing, go look up Quentin Tarantino defending Roman Polanski and basically victim shaming the minor. That is something you can't unhear. What do you think? Should he be extradited back to the US?
This is the worst way somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, never look up the picture. This is Hisashi Ouchi, and he became the most radioactive man in history after a lab accident. On September 30th, 1999, the 34-year-old Hisashi and 2 other co-workers were working at the Takamura nuclear plant in Takamura, Japan, and they were put on an extremely tight deadline by their superiors. The plant converted uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for the purposes of nuclear energy. This usually involved a carefully timed multi-step process, but Hisashi and his co-workers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadlines, but this led to an horrific explosion of uranium solution that turned into a nightmare for Hisashi. The plant underwent emergency evacuation and the 3 men were immediately rushed to help. They all had been directly exposed to harmful radiation, but to different degrees. The sole survivor of the group was exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation. The second one was exposed to 10 sieverts of radiation. And Hisashi was exposed to a whopping 17 sieverts of radiation, which was more than any human in history. And by the time Hisashi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood, but his agony had just begun. 3 days after the accident, Hisashi was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. Hisashi's lack of white blood cells and his non-existent immune response prompted experts to try a number of procedures to save him. Doctors tried countless skin grafts and blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants, but sadly none of these seemed to work. Hisashi soon cried out, "I can't take it anymore, I'm not a guinea pig," just after 1 week of treatment. But although Hisashi begged for his death, his family insisted that doctors kept him alive to keep trying experimental treatments. Hisashi's skin began to melt off his body, and even after this, his relatives ordered his doctors to do whatever it took to keep him alive. All in all, Hisashi was kept alive against his will for a disturbing 83 days. At one point, he suffered 3 heart attacks in 1 hour. Following the guidelines from his family, the doctors resurrected him again and again. Every time he died, he came back and suffered extreme brain damage. And on December 21st, 1999, Hisashi finally died of his last heart attack after multi-organ failure, and it was only then that his torture stopped. You really can't fathom the amount of pain this man was in until you see the photo of him. He doesn't even look human and kind of looks like an insect. The radiation poisoning is that bad, but I really don't recommend you look it up. But if you do, while you're looking at it, keep in mind he was kept alive for 83 days in that state. Could you honestly imagine what was going through his head and what his body was feeling?
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This is one of the worst true crime cases in history. This is the case of Sylvia Likens, who was a 16-year-old girl who, along with her younger sister Jenny, was left in the care of Jarud Benesweski by her parents. Jarud was a single mother with several children of her own. She agreed to take care of the Likens sisters in exchange for a small amount of money every week. The Liken parents were carnival workers and believed their daughters would be safe with Jarud. But that was far from the truth. Things took a horrific turn when Jarud and her children began to subject Sylvia to prolonged physical and emotional abuse. She was physically beaten, starved, and subjected to various forms of torture. Jarud's children and some neighborhood kids also participated in the abuse. Sylvia was kept locked in the basement where she endured unimaginable suffering. Jarud and the children not only beat Sylvia, but they also forced her to write degrading statements all over her own body, including phrases like, "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it." Sylvia was also burned with cigarettes, had her head shaved, and was often deprived of food and water. This abuse continued for months. On one occasion, as the family ate supper, Jarud, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy force-fed Sylvia a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard, ketchup, and spices. Sylvia vomited as a result and was later forced to eat her own vomit. On another occasion, Paula, who was Jarud's daughter, beat Sylvia in the face with such force that she broke her own wrist. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Sylvia. Jarud would also occasionally force Jenny, who was her younger sister, to strike her and beat her. And if she did not comply, they would just beat her. Several of Jarud's children's classmates frequently visited the house to both physically and verbally torment Sylvia. And with Jarud's active encouragement, these neighborhood children and her own routinely beat Sylvia, sometimes even using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, also lacerating her body and burning her with lit cigarettes over 100 times. They also severely injured her genitals. To entertain Jarud and her teenage accomplices, Sylvia was forced at one point to strip naked in the family living room and masturbate with a glass Pepsi Cola bottle in their presence. And this was all for the enjoyment of this woman right here. And due to the increase in the frequency and the brutality of the torture and mistreatment of Sylvia, she gradually became incontinent, which is the uncontrolled leakage of urine. She was then denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself. And as a form of punishment, Jarud threw Sylvia into the basement and tied her up. Here, Sylvia was kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement after overhearing a conversation, after overhearing Jarud say they were just going to leave her to die in the basement. Sylvia attempted to flee to the front door, however, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Jarud caught her before she could escape the property. And on the morning of October 26, 1965, Sylvia Likens tragically succumbed to her injuries and died in the basement. Her cause of death was a combination of severe malnutrition, physical trauma, and the overall abuse she endured. Her body was found with numerous injuries, including broken bones and extensive scarring, and the autopsy showed that there was more than 150 wounds across her body. Jarud was found guilty of first-degree murder and she was sentenced to life in prison. But somehow she was released in 1985 on parole, which is just sickening. She deserves to be underneath the prison. This is just absolutely horrifying. The Sylvia Likens case is a heartbreaking and disturbing true crime story that continues to captivate and horrify people to this day. There's a lot more I could talk about in this case, so if you want a part 2, let me know. Rest in peace to Sylvia Likens, and I can't believe this case.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.